Mrs. Jean McConville was a widow with 10 children who lived in 1A St. Jude's Walk, Divis Flats in West Belfast. Jean was an East Belfast Protestant who was married to Arthur McConville, a Catholic and former soldier in the British Army. Mrs. McConville converted to Catholicism on her marriage to Arthur. Initially they lived in East Belfast, but following the outbreak of the Troubles in 1969, they were subjected to sectarian intimidation and violence, which eventually forced them to leave their home in East Belfast. They moved into temporary accommodation before settling into the Divis Flats, off the Falls Road in West Belfast. Arthur McConville died in January 1972. Mrs. McConville had only moved into the home a week before the abduction. Her children were Anne, age 20, Robert, age 17, Arthur, age 16, Helen, aged 15, Agnes, aged 13, Michael, aged 11, Thomas, aged 9, Susan, aged 8, and 6-year-old twins William and James. Anne was ill in hospital at the time of Mrs. McConville's death and died. There is no formal record of the abduction of Mrs. McConville anywhere. It cannot therefore be established exactly when she disappeared. The family remember her as disappearing the day after she was attacked after having allegedly been taken from a bingo hall on the pretext that her daughter had been in an accident and that she needed to go to the hospital. The family say that she told them that she had been attacked after leaving the bingo hall and that she had been told not to give information to the military. They remember her coming home in great distress, bruised and dazed. Police records show that on November 30th, 1972, a report was received at 2 a.m. from an Army unit stating that at 11 p.m. on November 29th, 1972, that a woman had been found wandering in the street. She was very distressed, and the Army stated her name was Mary McConville of St. Jude's Walk. Jean McConville's mother-in-law was called Mary McConville. It is thought by the family that the woman found by the Army may have been Jean McConville, who was asking for her mother-in-law. The following day, Mrs. McConville was abducted. Archie McConville gave evidence to the coroner at his mother's inquest. On December 7th, I was at home with my mother Jean and the rest of our family at St. Jude's Walk, Divis Flats, Belfast. At the time I was 16 years of age. My sister Helen had gone to the chip shop to get chips for us. In the house that evening was my sisters Agnes and Suzanne, and my brothers Michael, Billy, Thomas and Jim. I was the eldest child there. At around 6:30 p.m. we heard banging on the door of the flat. I answered the door and 4 masked men and 4 masked women came in. They came into the house and told my mother to put on her coat. We were all in a panic and the children were squealing everywhere. We were afraid of what they were going to do to our mother. They said that she was only being taken for questioning for a few hours. My mother was very upset and I asked if I could go too. They allowed me to go with her. The rest of the children were left in the house on their own. Helen was not back from the chip shop at that stage. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, they put guns to my head and told me to fuck off back up the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs there were about 18 to 20 people, all masked and had guns. They were all casually dressed and had balaclavas. There was a blue minibus there. I think it was Volkswagen and a brown Maxi Cavalier car. I went back up the stairs after being ordered up at gunpoint. I looked out the pigeonhole from the flats onto the street, and I did not see any of the vehicles going past. I had to get the children quietened down. Helen came back at that stage. We just waited and waited from that night, for years and years, and we never saw our mother alive again. One of Mrs. McConville's sons stated that he sought advice from a local politician, and was told to report his mother's abduction to the police. This he did within 2 days at Hastings Street Police Station. He also went to Albert Street Barracks and told the Army that the woman they had picked up the night before had been abducted. On both occasions he was told that the matter would be looked into, but nothing happened. Approximately 3 weeks after Mrs. McConville's abduction, a young man called at her home and gave her family her purse and 3 rings. Over the years since her disappearance, people have speculated that Mrs. McConville may have been abducted because she assisted a soldier who had been shot. However, the only soldier shot at this time was shot in the thigh by an IRA sniper at the junction of Dunlambert Street and Barak Street on December 15, 1972. Mrs. McConville's children have a memory of her going to the assistance of an injured soldier whom they say was shot before their father died in January 1972. They state that he was moaning on a balcony above the flat in which they lived previously, and that Mrs. McConville went to his assistance until help arrived. However, it is apparent that people in the area were aware of this event, and it may well have caused suspicion about Mrs. McConville, who was known to have been a Protestant who had converted to Catholicism on her marriage to a Catholic former member of the British Army. Following Mrs. McConville's disappearance in 1972, her children searched for her. That search continued for 31 years. The police review in 1995 led to the receipt of information that a body may have been buried in an old grave in West Belfast, and the person who had been buried might be Mrs. McConville. In February 2003, scientific tests were carried out at the location which was identified, but it was established that there was nothing to cause any concern, and that an additional body had not been added to the grave. Mrs. McConville's remains were found on Shelling Hill Beach, Carlingford on August 26, 2003. They were taken to Louth County Mortuary. The date of Mrs. McConville's death was described as being between December 7 and 21, 1972. A post-mortem examination was carried out by Dr. Richard Shepard on August 28, 2003. He identified the cause of death as a firearm wound to the back of the head. On September 1, 2003, a second examination was carried out by Dr. Marie Cassidy, Deputy State Pathologist. She identified the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the head. A sample of bone from the body was sent to the Forensic Science Laboratory in Birmingham, England, together with blood and hair samples from Archie and Agnes McConville. The items were submitted for mitochondrial DNA testing to determine whether or not the body was that of Mrs. Jean McConville. The body was formally identified as being that of Mrs. Jean McConville on October 20, 2003. The coroner sought expert evidence as to the geographical history of the area in which Mrs. McConville was found. A senior executive engineer from Louth County Council gave evidence to the inquest in relation to coastal erosion at Shelling Hill Beach. He stated that an extreme storm event occurred on February 1, 2002, and that it washed away part of the car park and roadway. The high embankment west of the car park was eroded and undermined. He also stated that at the location at which Mrs. McConville's body was found, the erosion has lowered the beach by 10 to 12 inches in recent times. A verdict of unlawful killing was delivered by the coroner for County Louth, Mr. Ronan Maguire, following the inquest which took place on April 5, 2004. The Provisional IRA claimed for many years that they did not abduct and murder Mrs. McConville. In March 1999, the Provisional IRA admitted that they had killed a number of people, including Mrs. McConville, and alleged that some of them had been informants. The Provisional IRA have consistently stated since that date that Mrs. McConville was abducted because she was an informant. Informants are used by virtually every arm of the security forces and services across the world. There isn't a crime file that relates to Jean McConville's abduction. There does not appear to have been an investigation. It is clear from the files that police were aware by January 2, 1973, that Mrs. McConville had disappeared. No action was taken in respect of the information received by police about Mrs. McConville's abduction. The children received no help for a period of almost 2 months after Mrs. McConville was abducted until February 1973, when some of the children were taken into care. Over the years, the McConville family have suffered significantly following the loss of their mother and the fact that her abduction was not investigated. They have suffered also because, their father having died 10 months previously, the family was split up and did not grow up together. The years following her abduction were extremely difficult for the children as they grew to adulthood. They have also suffered because their mother's body was not found until August 26, 2003, despite extensive searches. There is no evidence, information, or intelligence of any kind which refers to or emanated from Mrs. Jean McConville prior to January 2, 1973. She is not recorded as having been an agent at any time. She was an innocent woman who was abducted and murdered. Cry, city, cry at the story of your Jean, at the orphaning of children, not for Palestine or the Holocaust, not for the mothers of Syria or the children of Iraq, but cry for your own generations and your lore. Cry for each August, for your clockwork men, for the ghostly whistles and the beating drum, for the mascots and the trophies, the obscenities of your city walls, your whispering communities, and the ugliness of your broken streets. Cry, politicians in your hollow assemblies. Cry, men of God in your pulpits and your confessionals, for yourselves and for yours, for the hatred in your cellars, the guns in your parlors, the balaclavas in your sideboards, bullets in your kitchen drawer. Cry, city, cry, for the bones of an innocent woman, for the earth that cherished her, and that finally gave her up.